Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Me. How are you? So
Fine.
there's Richard Herriott, and I see Michael Newnham, and I see Elizabeth Raum. So these are
Seems like the
my.
Hollywood Squares.
I won't vote
I
you off
want
or
to be.
turn your
I
light
just
off.
want to say, I want to be Paul Lind.
Oh.
Yes. I want to be Rich Little.
Oh, behave.
Paul Lynn.
Well, welcome to the Music Makers Chat number 1. I'm hoping to make this a series of a variety of genres of music, not just classical, talking about people who make music and who bring it to life. So we're recording this. Our first question. So for composers, I would like to know composing for instruments that you might not know very much about or nothing at all. How do you manage that?
Betsy, you go first.
Okay, I will, because I'm composing for harp, and that's really it's a totally different way of writing music, because you have to worry about the pedals. You have to worry about what they can play in the first place. So I spent like all day going on YouTube, and also the harpist Angela Schwarzkopf. She has a really good PowerPoint presentation on writing for harp, and I've written to her, and so now I have the pedals. She says, give me the pedal diagram for the beginning of the piece and for major changes, and then the rest of it you just say, okay, F goes to F sharp. And that's another thing, harp is enharmonic, so it could be an F sharp or it could be a G flat. It depends on what you've already got there. So it gets very, very confusing, and you've got to think, now does she have enough time to move her pedals? I was talking last night in rehearsal to the second level player in Orchestra Toronto, Lois, and she had played a Wagner, I don't know if it's an opera or what, but there were like 4 or 5 harpists there. And she said when there was one of the changes, she says, all you heard was the harpist changing their pedals. So pedaling is a huge thing for the harps. And also the number of special effects that they have is wonderful. I can't wait for this piece that we're going to be doing, the soundscape that I need for it, Northern Lights, all kinds of things that the harp can do. And she and I are going to have a Zoom meeting, and she's going to show me the things. She already showed me the things on the PowerPoint, but now I can ask her questions directly. So yeah, it's a little different writing for an instrument you don't know anything about. Even for writing an instrument I know about is tough, because I know about what were you going to say, Richard?
I have a question for you, because maybe I'm misinformed here, but when you write for harp, maybe you can answer this one as well, Michael. When you write for harp within an orchestral texture, is it in the home key, for instance? Is it C major, or do you have to, for some reason, I was led to believe that you had to write it a semitone lower or something?
No.
You write it in the home key. How do you do it?
If it's in C, it's all the pedals are in the middle.
Right.
Anytime you make it sharp, you put the pedal down. And as I said, harmonic, you have to use all the letters, but in the scale. But whether it's a flat or a sharp, it's what's most convenient for the pedals to be in and for the harpist. Now, I'm not speaking as a harpist. I'm speaking as someone who studied it for several hours on YouTube. So,
yeah.
And then the flat keys are the pedals are up. So
right.
Again, you'd have to talk to a harpist. Like if it's in the key of C, the pedals are all in the middle. That's fine. That's easy. If it's in the key of, say, G, you need an F sharp. So let me see. F sharp was the second pedal on the right. So that would have to be down. So everything else is where it is, and then the other one is down. And so, but I'm really not sure about a lot. And you've got to give them time if they want to go to an F natural there. You've got to give them time to move the pedal. And you write on the part F natural so they'll know, hurry up and change the pedal. Same thing with the timpanis. You only have 4 timpanis.
Yeah.
A lot of writing if you want to change the, now they do have now chromatic timpani, so they do.
Yes.
But I look at the timpani parts, you know, when I write a piece and the part comes back to me and I see all F to G or something like that. I see what the timpanist has done. I wouldn't have the audacity to put that in the timpani part. I let them do it, or I'm like, but yeah, it's those instruments are unusual, and even the strings. I don't know how many times I've written things that were unplayable, like double stops on a violin, both of them below D. And I've been told by the violinist, no, you can't have a double stop below D on you know, the just below the staff. And I go, oh, of course you don't. You'd think I'd know because my daughter's a violinist, so is my sister. But yeah. So you put divise.
How about you, Richard? Have you had any issues with writing for instruments that you don't play? Or do you play them all? You never know.
No, I don't. I was a very part-time clarinet player in a concert band when I was a kid, and I was dreadful, largely because I was very fussy about the sound, because one of my favorite clarinet players was Gervais de Peyer, the French clarinet player. And I was very fussy, and I just couldn't anyway. But I was very fortunately married to, for 23 years, to a marvelous British oboist, for whom I wrote, actually as our engagement present, I wrote a thing called the Newfoundland Rhapsody. Some of the material actually turned into the Newfie Bullet, but only a couple of bars. But it's amazing how you sort of, Bach did that, and sort of Vivaldi, so get away with it. I wrote her a Cor Anglais sonata, which became very popular, actually. We played it quite a few times and played it on our Southeast Asian tour. The thing about it is, because I listened from a very early age to a lot of orchestral music, just out of fascination, out of habit, just, you know. And so and of course, being married to Liz and writing for her and things like that, she was very helpful in what is going to work technically in terms of how to make, because I mean, the cor anglais is not a very agile instrument in the same way that the oboe is. I mean, and you don't write virtuosically for the cor anglais in the same way that you would for the oboe. So you explore different things. I did explore some elements of virtuosity, which actually she was, because she's a fantastic player with a marvelous technique and everything else, so she could actually do these things and made it sound quite extraordinary. But it was the actual, you know, you think about the sound. And for me, again, you know, writing for orchestra, I wrote a number of things for my own little group in Leeds, a chamber orchestra. And then I was commissioned to write a guitar concerto for Craig Ogden, the Australian guitarist who's based in England, for Leeds Symphony Orchestra. It was the first time I orchestrated something for a big orchestra. And it's funny because with that, I was told that I had underscored. The conductor complained. He said that he thought it was a good piece, but he said, I've underscored. And I said, yeah, but it's a guitar. It's not a piano concerto. And he said, yeah, but Craig's got one of these things that you can attach so that you can make the guitar louder. I said, yeah, I don't want that. I want, you know, I mean, like you take the Rodrigo guitar, the famous one. The orchestration of that is so magnificent, but it's quite transparent. So you can actually hear what the guitar is doing. I mean, when it was written, the guitar didn't have that kind of thing. I mean, yeah, Craig used his thing to make it louder and stuff. And I did do some stuff to sort of enhance it, but I wasn't going to give the brass section more, because the brass section buy him all the beer after the Monday night rehearsal. You know what I mean? It's just, I just felt, no, this is about music, and I wanted Craig to be heard, you know, and also because of the music. Writing that was a little bit easier because I knew a lot of the players. The first time I wrote for Orchestra Toronto, I didn't know anybody. I had heard about the orchestra and heard about the quality of the playing and everything else, and so wrote accordingly with the Newfie Bullet. And then, of course, the second concerto, the rock concerto, was a lot easier to write because I knew the players very well, and I knew what to expect. I mean, what they did with the Newfie Bullet was fantastic, but I think the rock concerto, in some ways, the orchestration for me was probably more successful because it felt more personal. And for me, I like to write not just for the instrument, but especially for the person behind it. You know, this is something that because I mean, you know, this is what happens. You get asked to write something, or you write something for somebody because you're writing something. It's a flute player, or like you, Jay, or I'm writing for you thing, something, or things I wrote for Liz or whatever. You're writing for the person and not just the instrument. That's my initial thought.
So I wonder, Michael, we were wondering how can a conductor be helpful to composers in the process of writing for a particular ensemble or a particular sound or person? How do you think you can be helpful?
Well, it's a really great question because I want to know the answer to that one myself. And I never really know the answer to that. I can only say that sometimes if it's a completely new piece, for example, when we did the rock concerto, Richard's rock concerto, Richard just said, you know, do what you feel has to be done during the rehearsals. If you have to make some changes, in other words, double something. I felt that, for example, during that whole process, a lot of the bass lines would have been more powerful if they were doubled by the double basses as opposed to just the cellos alone. There were some brass chords that I felt could be stronger if they were filled out in a different way. And my whole fear and trepidation is I didn't really, we had met, Richard and I, but we didn't really know each other that well. And so I was really so afraid that hellfire would rain down on me if I changed anything. But he just kept saying, no, do what you have to do. And so I remember writing emails back to Rich and saying, you know, well, this rehearsal tonight, we decided to do this. And just waiting until the next morning. And then he would write back and say, oh, good, sounds good. Do you like it? And you know, it was so easy to have that feeling of trust. And so I think actually maybe I can answer this question as a little bit is that once the beautiful thing is that if there's this feeling of trust that can develop between a composer and a performer, and in my case, a conductor, it really helps a lot. It was really great to work on Betsy's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight last year with Orchestral. I remember it wasn't the first piece of Betsy's that I worked on. And the first one I think that I ever did, well, actually this is before I worked on the violin concerto, Betsy. It was one of your fanfares. And then about a few years back with the Peterborough Symphony, we worked on Betsy's violin concerto that she wrote for her daughter, Erica. And I remember really lacing into that because Erica was going to be the soloist of the Peterborough Symphony. I did not know Erica yet. I loved the idea of Elizabeth Raum writing a concerto for her daughter, the violin soloist, Erica Raum. And just as an idea, I thought that was so fantastic. And then once I got into this, I really spent a lot of time before getting in front of the orchestra. I was really not scared of it, but in the sense that you just feel this incredible feeling of responsibility towards the composer and towards the piece and towards the orchestra. And finally, when it happened and it all came together, it's this feeling of elation that you know that you have a relationship with the music, but also if you're lucky enough and the composer is around, and here I've got two composers that are here, and you develop a relationship with these people, and then you think of future projects that you can do, and that is when it really becomes exciting because you can how can one of the ways a conductor can help if it's a music director is how can what other things can we do? Because what we're trying to do really, conductors are there to get the best out of an orchestra, to make the most out of a piece, but also to help enrich the repertoire. And there are so many composers out there, we don't have a chance to work with all of them. We would love to, but we just don't. There's this, you know, we've only got a lifetime and so many concerts a year. And so every time I can make a relationship with a composer, and there have been a few along the way, I want to nurture that. And so that's where it becomes really exciting.
Go ahead, Richard. Hi.
So, Michael, first of all, what you did with the rock concerto, I mean, thank you. It was brilliant. And also, I mean, I remember those rehearsals vividly. But the thing about it is, for me, because I mean, I'm not a real conductor, but I do play a ballet pianist on television. But from my own point of view, from conducting my own works and from conducting, you know, from your standpoint, you're hearing the best of everything, obviously, because that's why the conductor is put there. And so when I felt, and we had that first meeting at that pub, just up road from the Meridian Center in the September, and talked about things and everything else, and realized that we're both Emerson, Lake and Palmer fans and Yes fans and everything else and all that kind of stuff. But you know, my modus operandi, whenever I play my own music on my own, I probably never play it the same way twice. I mean, I've written it down, but there's always things that are going to happen. But I've always made it a policy whenever I've written music for anybody else, whether it's my former wife or whatever, I've always made it a policy to say, look, you find it. I'm not going to get in the way, because I've worked with some composers who just like micromanage the whole thing to the point where you just give up the will to live, you know? And then I've worked with other composers. Philip Feeney is one I would mention, the British composer for Dracula and Hunchback and Cinderella and things like that with Northern Valley, for a colleague of mine at Central, who just basically, you know, I've played some of his music, solo piano pieces, and he just said, Rich, he said, you know what to do. And I play it for him. And he'd make the odd suggestion, but I mean, you know, the ones who stand back and say, just do it, find it, they're the ones that are easier. And I just thought with Orchestra Toronto, especially with the rock concerto, because I knew the group and had gotten to know you, and, you know, we'd exchanged all these emails and everything else and all that. It was, you know, it's so much easier if I just felt like I'm going to stand back. I'm just the soloist now. You know, I've done the work. And really, in many ways, it's up to you and up to the musicians to make it because you guys are being the ones who are going to bring it to life. And that for me is tremendous. And and at that point, I sort of feel like, well, what right do I have to interfere anymore with this? Because they're bringing this thing to life, and they're actually, you know, it's other people's feelings. Other people have feelings. And it's the same thing that happened to me when I played with the Newfie Bullet with the Newfoundland Symphony Orchestra with Mark, is Mark David. You know, we had a tremendous time, and they played it very, very differently to the first performance that I did with Orchestra Toronto, but they felt it differently. And I just thought, hey, and Mark had some ideas as well. And I thought, you know, this is great. You have to, you know, if you sit back and let it happen, for me as a composer in my own experience, you sit back and let it happen, then, you know, because, you know, I mean, okay, I'm still alive. And so I might feel I can exercise some control on how my music should be played. You know, Chopin doesn't, nor does Beethoven. But, you know, this is where you get so much information from the DNA of the spirit of the composer, behind, you know, the composer behind Chopin and Beethoven and Liszt and all this. And if you get behind that spirit, then I think you find something right. You must know this when you conducted the Ninth Symphony or when you've conducted Mozart opera. You know, Am I making any sense here? I'm sort
Oh,
of,
absolutely.
you know,
Sure, Betsy, have you got a comment?
yeah.
Say that the music you write, Richard, is, I shouldn't say easy to play. Technically, not necessarily, but I think a musician knows where you probably want to go with it. I recently went to a conference, a tuba conference, because I write a lot of tuba music, and Gene Pokorny gave a lecture. He's a tuba with the Chicago Symphony, and he had a tenor singing, Pavarotti actually, singing something from Puccini. And you saw the music, he had the music projected, and of course, Pavarotti wasn't paying any attention to the directions on it because that's the way singers sing, they do their own thing. And the point of this, now he's a tuba player, keep in mind, is mainly orchestral, but the point of his lecture was that you can't write down emotions like that. You can't put everything in. You have to let the musicians play what they, and the music you play is so natural. You're such a natural musician that when, it's true. When someone reads what you're playing, they sense where it should go. Now, you might have some little things that you would like changed, perhaps, but in general, I shouldn't say it's easy, but you know what I'm saying.
I know, I understand you completely. And I mean, if I may say the thing that, I mean, especially the last thing I heard from yours, because I was sort of listening to the Halifax Harbor, but then I was just about to go play the Newsy Bullets. So I was sort of preoccupied. But last year when I heard the piece that was involved with the Romeo and Juliet concert, I so enjoyed it because I just felt that you have such marvelous orchestral textures, and I'm wildly jealous. And I mean, it's fantastic stuff. But what I found was I felt that you took us somewhere.
It's from an orchestra, Richard. After over 50 years of playing in an orchestra, I get
absolutely. You got it right there. I mean, I was a member of the Northern Ballet Theatre Orchestra for 17 years as principal pianist, and only playing, well, Romeo and Juliet, Prokofiev, Philip Feeney's Dracula, Hunchback, and Cinderella, and then very little else. So, and then I would, so being surrounded by these people, it taught me a great deal about orchestration, but being an oboist, you're right in the middle of it. I mean, an oboist, you're the savior of everything.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Betsy. Because I know a lot of the music that you've written, particularly when you were with the Regina Symphony, you were a member of the orchestra, so you would have to sit back and play as a member of the orchestra, and you would finish a score and hand it off for it to be done. Have you had, be gentle please, but have you had some situations over time where you've been in the orchestra and you've seen that things are going in a way that really that's not what you had in mind, and it really isn't, I don't like this, and how do you deal with that?
Actually, no, for the most part, when I'm in the orchestra, if there's something not quite right, I just ask the conductor, I'll stand up, I'm right in the middle, not too tall, I don't get and I'll just stand up and say, could you do this or do that? And there's never been a problem. Well, like, you remember you asked me what did I want to do with the trombones in Sir Gawain?
Mm-hmm.
And you asked me, why did I write that part? Because you wanted to get the right interpretation. And I said, I wanted to give the trombones a good part. Because my husband plays trombone. And that often is the case.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we had another question that was posted. When do you know whether an idea, like a composition idea, is going to become a larger orchestral work as opposed to a chamber work? Like you get your germs of ideas.
When I'm asked. If an orchestra asks me to write something, then I get a large orchestra idea. And if a flute and harp asks me, then I get a flute and harp idea.
But Betsy, have you had a situation where, let's say, you're working on a string quartet or a chamber music piece, and you're thinking, well, because, for example, I'm looking a lot these days at again, at Brahms, the first serenade, right? And here's an example of a piece that Brahms, as a young composer, had, what he wanted to do was write something in the style of a cassation for winds, for 8 winds or 9 winds. And as he got working on it, then he realized, I think I've got an orchestral piece here. It's not just a wind serenade. And then he had to sort of read, and you can take the first piano concerto, the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
And keep going, you know, because it was supposed to be the first symphony, ended up being the D minor concerto. Has that happened to either of you?
Betsy, do you want to go first, or?
All I would have to say is no.
Okay. Richard, Rich, I know this has happened to you, so go ahead.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm very fortunate because my professional life, my day job, is my actual workshop as a composer, because I create original music for ballet and contemporary class at, currently I'm now restricted to working at the National Ballet School. I shouldn't use the word restricted, that's a poor word. I can't go and play for the company because of the whole bubble thing and everything, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, enough said about that, but I'm in a lovely situation at the moment. But, you know, I've been at the ballet, I've been involved in dance for 30 years. And I was very fortunate that the artistic director of Central School of Ballet in London, where I started doing this, insisted that the musicians, not so much, well, improvise, but the way he described it was more of a case of spontaneous composition. So it sounded like, and I learned a great deal from Philip Feeney, who I mentioned earlier, about use of keyboard harmony and modulation and all kinds of tools of the trade. And much of the Nufi Bullet was actually created in class, and quite a bit of the rock concerto. In fact, when some of the friends of mine from Evelyn Hart's class came to hear the Nufi Bullet, you know, they sort of said afterwards, well, we recognize quite a bit of the last bit because that sounded like what you normally play for Allegro, you know, you know, that kind of thing. And that happened several years ago when some of the dancers from Northern Ballet came to hear the guitar concerto. They recognized things that were being developed in class. And anyway, to get to the punchline here, I'm currently writing my third piano concerto, and it's for Valerie Tryon. We've been talking about this over the summer because she invited me to be part of something that she was involved with. And so a lot of that is being developed in class. And I think for me, what happens is that I will come up with an idea, even for a simple adage or rondejam or pliés or something, you know, big grand allegro type thing or whatever. And if it's a good tune or something in contemporary class that involves a lot of, you know, I mean, a lot of the stuff I do for contemporary is very prog rock based and very sort of, well, I'm medieval as well. I mean, I cover a wide range of different styles, but, you know, if I come up with a good idea, and I've got my moleskin right here, and I've got loads of them. I've got another one right here, rescued from the fire from last year, but loads of ideas. And I just wait and see as to what direction they're going to go in, because I can hear them in many, many different ways. And at the moment, during the lockdown from March until May, I wrote a 45-minute epic piece, which was based on a lot of things that I had developed in class. I'm still editing that, but it depends on what, you know, it depends on what comes up. I've got enough ideas that, you know, it can go in any direction. As Betsy said, you know, it depends on what you get asked to do. But but also at the moment, I'm thinking is certainly with this piano concerto that I'm writing for Valerie, how to orchestrate it and how to make the piano part a unique thing. And I want it to be totally different from the Nufi Bullet or the Rock Concerto. Because, I mean, the Rock Concerto is completely different to the Nufi Bullet. And the third one needs to be an entirely different kind of thing, you know? That's...
Because I don't see Valerie playing the Rock Concerto.
No. She liked the Nufi Bullet a lot. She really enjoyed that. But yeah, no, I can't see. No, it's... And so the thing I'm writing for Valerie, I mean, she's an amazing pianist. She's a wonderful pianist. But the thing I'm writing for her is quite... it's very English and very, you know, well, the sort of weather we've got tonight.
But I think for Valerie, I always think of Valerie as being, you know, Liszt.
Yes. Oh, her Liszt is astonishing.
Yeah.
Her Liszt is just to die for, you know. But her Ravel and her, you know,
She's a fantastic Chopin pianist as well.
Chopin, but her Liszt, I mean, I've listened to the recordings of the Chopin etudes, and then the Liszt transcendental etudes. I mean, her Feu Follet, number 5, you know, I mean, honestly, you couldn't make it up.
Yeah.
But lovely lady, and she's 80 now. She's, you know, and she invited me to be a part of this thing in the summer where she wanted me to do my Happy Birthday variations as part of a concert that she'd been, you know, involved with Boris Brott. And that was a huge honor, and that's where the whole discussion came, you know. But yeah, it's lovely to write something for somebody that you know and respect, you know, and that's, for me, that's a really paramount and premium element. Best way of putting it, I guess. I don't know.
Michael, I was wondering what do you find are the most challenging things for you to prepare a piece for soloist and orchestra, especially a new piece that hasn't been written before? There's no tradition behind it. What's your biggest challenge for when you're dealing with a concerto situation?
A concerto or any piece?
A concerto in particular, working with a soloist and an orchestra.
But a new piece.
Yes. Or whatever. Share. Tell me.
Oh,
what do you want?
Well, I'd have to divide that into 2 parts, Jay. For me, any new piece, and that could be a piece that was written 200 years ago or a piece that was written yesterday. What I want to know first is basically what the form is. And so the first, I do a whole series of scans in, if you want to look at it that way. And my process is to see if I can see where the big structures are, where the tectonic plates are in the piece. And then I go smaller. And then it's partly to do with doing analysis, but I have to find a way that an analysis is something I don't want to share with anybody because it only speaks to me. It's my way of understanding what, let's say, the harmonies are doing, or why they're there, or how the melodic structure works. And then I have to see if it's, well, if we're talking about orchestra, I have to see how the instruments relate to each other. And then that probably brings in the idea of concerto. And so you want to know how the orchestra relates to the soloist, the orchestral parts relate, and where the dialogues. That's big. For me, concertos are a fantastic thing in that this is where symphony meets chamber music. And so you want to see where there are things, how the orchestra can be a speaking partner, is if there are 2 actors on stage or 2 singers, and how they can relate to each other, and which way that music might go if the soloist decides to do something, or if they decide to do something else. It's all about pre-planning. Pre-planning is dangerous because you don't want to do too much of it, but you have to do some of it. And sometimes if you can, when you get to the point after doing all those scans, of all the, the analysis, and you've analyzed the heck out of something, then it comes to the point where you have to say to yourself, well, what does this mean to me? And then what could this mean to that person? And I always feel that the more sure I am about what a piece of music means to me, the better positioned I am as a conductor to work with a soloist, even if it's the soloist happens to be the composer of the thing, Richard, and and because I have some, I know that that piece has said something to me in this spot, in this spot, in this spot, in this spot, and sometimes I feel that some things that we might suggest as an orchestra, because I have to lead the orchestra, might actually surprise that soloist who might be the composer, and or not the composer, and then we have a new thing to work with. You know, you're always looking for material to work on and ways of dialoguing. So that, you know, that's all of a part of an incredibly exciting process, which is very it you know, I mean, I have to say, one of the things I love is getting a new piece of music. You know, the Betsy's piece that I've just never seen before, or Richard's piece I've never seen before, and look at something, and there at my desk, and I'm thinking, well, that's kind of neat, but how does that actually sound? I go over to the piano, I sit it down, and I play it through, and I go, whoa! There's this moment of just, because you know the person, and you see that person there in that moment, and it's a, you're there, and it's a great, it's elating, that whole experience.
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, Michael, thank you very much. And I mean, I have to say, at the end of the day, you know, when I look back on the rehearsals that we had, and then I remember the final rehearsal for the Rock Concerto before we went into the theater, and the first section, the bum 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 with the bassoons, you know.
Yep.
And you took it at a tempo, and I thought, right, okay. And then we stopped for some reason, and you looked at me and you said, "Was that all right?" And I said, "Yeah, it was great." Pumping like mad, and I'm thinking to myself, and I remember going home that evening and pouring myself a vodka and tonic just to sort of, you know, get some equilibrium, yeah, and thinking to myself, I kind of hope he does that on Sunday, because I think it needs it. Because after that whole business at the beginning, and that sort of very pretentious barbarian business, and you know, what I mean, the thing is, at the end of the day, you know, it's, you took ownership of it, and that for me is not only flattering for me, because it says to me that you cared about the music and you enjoyed it, but that you decided, you had an idea about a vision about how you felt it should go. And I thought to and this is why I said earlier, you know, when I feel that, I just think I'm just going to stay out of this. I'm just the soloist here, you know, because it's, like I said, it's the musicians. And so that, you know, and when we got to the concert on the Sunday, I think you took it easy in the dress rehearsal, but when we got to the performance, it was like,
Bad out of hell time.
oh, it was bad. Hell, it was mad. It was great.
Yeah.
But it was like, but it was that music. I mean, that kind of music.
You write bad out of hell music.
Yeah, it's mad, mad as a box of frogs, that kind of stuff. I mean, and it was intentionally written to be that way. And you know. Well,
so, because the thing I'm sorry, I'm stepping in there, but the thing I also have to say is that we all have to be aware of this, is that when a performance of music happens, and I think this is really important to say in these COVID times.
Yeah.
That it's us, the performers. You have the soloist, you have the orchestra, you have all the musicians in the orchestra, you have the conductor, and then you have the audience, which is also part of the performance. And since you have that element that's there that has not been there to this point, that whole experience becomes something that's really heightened. And now I know in my case, I know this. I tend to jack up the tempo a little bit, and and other things happen, you know, um, and we're all like that. We're human beings. We're, you know, we're subject to various elements that are out there, but the spiritual existence of live people being there is going to change the performance to being something much more than it would have been otherwise.
Good. Go ahead, Richard. You're good.
I'm so glad you said that, Michael, because this week at the ballet school, we had working with the grade 10 girls, we had their first, official show. It was a Zoom class for their parents. And we were all quite nervous. I mean, I get nervous for these things as well. I mean, I've written all the music and I've got, you know, like I said, it's in my moleskin, you know, and you want to make sure that everything's going to be all right, because the ballet teacher doesn't set the exercise. She just basically says, right, plies, and the one that I'm working with, she likes to join it all together. So I've got to keep my ears akimbo. We were all quite nervous on Wednesday. And, you know, I think this whole thing about, you know, stage fright and everything else and all that kind of stuff. I think, you know, I don't mind the nerves. I don't mind being scared. I don't mind being, I mean, like I did the Appassionata this summer in a concert at the Barn, the Summer Symphony at the Barn. Lovely place. And the pianist who played before me was so inspiring. This little 10-year-old kid, I mean, 10-year-old kid played like, you know, a genius. I mean, she was really fantastic. And I'm backstage wandering around tractors and trying not to, you know, light up and everything else and all that. And I was absolutely terrified before I walked out there to do that, you know, knowing that it was going to be worldwide broadcast as well as a socially distanced audience and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, things like that, they make a difference, because I said to the artistic director at the ballet school today, Mavis Staines, I said, my feeling about the whole importance of pre-concert nerves and pre-concert excitement, it's not so, I mean, it is the artistic, it's the artistic message that you want to give to people, the audience, as you said, Michael, which is the most, you know, I mean, they've paid the money, they've paid the tickets, they've come to hear this, they want to be entertained, they want to be enriched, they want to have their lives changed. It's not so much, I mean, yes, it's the artistic skill, the technical skill, the preparation, but it's also the human telepathy and the generation of emotion and human energy that we don't often talk about or identify in performing arts. As I mean, there is a, you know, I've felt it in attending concerts of people like Claudio Arrau or Yehudi Menuhin or Vladimir Ashkenazi or Alicia Del Rocca. There's a kind of, you feel a kind of, Marek Jablonski is one fantastic example of this, the Polish-Canadian pianist. You feel a kind of energy that comes from this human soul while they're playing so magnificently, but you feel there's an energy that comes forth, and that is something that gets built up prior to. So naturally, you know, it's easy to sort of, as you said, Michael, the tempo is going to go up. The temperature is going to go up. The whole thing is going to go up. And that's sacred, absolutely sacred. Everything what you said, Michael, and you know, it's just, yeah, it's sacred.
I have a question for Betsy, because I know that you write music that gets sent off to other parts of the world for people to play, that you might not be involved in as far as the rehearsal of it is concerned. And you might hear a performance of it for the first time when it's played by those people. And I want to give the example of Mononof. And you look at his tempo markings. And, you know, when you plan out a performance of a piece by Rachmaninoff in the tempo markings, and then you listen to his own recordings of these things, they're very different and often very rhapsodic on his part. And so then the next thing that it goes on in our minds as interpreters is, how engraved in stone are these metronome markings? I'm not trying to catch you up, but I'm just interested in what your take is on this.
Like the lecture that I went to with James Corney, the tuba player. He does not believe in everything being engraved in stone. I've often gotten emails from people telling me how they felt about it. And my philosophy is that I write the music, I hand it to them, they're the next step. It's theirs now. Unless they're doing something that's really horrible, you know, but I don't really write that kind of music, and you don't either, Richard. I know that.
Yeah.
Composers write music that it can sound dreadful because you can't figure out what they wanted. It needs explanation. And I remember I wrote a piece for oboe called "The Phantom Drum" for Joey Salvaleggio, who was a spectacular oboe player. And there was another piece. It was the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra that played, and another composer was there. And I couldn't hear the rehearsal. And he says, "How can you possibly let them play without hearing a rehearsal?" I couldn't get there in time. You know. I wasn't worried. and Joey did a spectacular job, and the orchestra did as well. So I think it depends a bit on the type of music you write. But I really feel adamantly that once I give the piece to the performer, they're the next step in the creative process.
This is interesting because it goes into this whole performance practice, historically informed performances, and this whole philosophy that what we are trying to do is do exactly what that composer 250 years ago would have wanted and would have heard. And, you know, it's impossible. I think I love a lot of things that the HIP movement has done. And I think it really has invigorated our way of performing the Viennese classics and many other things, you know, to really look into ways of articulating things stronger, or looking at tempos, looking at Beethoven tempos for the symphonies, for example, seeing if they work at the faster tempos than what we were used to. All the time feeling that if we ever see Beethoven in the pearly gates of composerdom or musicians, hopefully he's not going to throw something at us. But you know, we just the basic thing that we keep returning to is that what does that piece mean to you as a performer, and does it mean something that personal, and how are you going to use that piece, not to talk about yourself, but to talk about the piece, and something that's in it that's really important. It has to be given to people, and you can't ignore the fact that a piece was written by somebody, but it goes through somebody else, or maybe the same person. But even sometimes that person who wrote it, that Rachmaninoff or whoever, is going to feel differently about it as a performer than they did as a composer.
You know, I find...
Hold on a second. Sorry, Betsy. Can you turn up your input mic again a little bit? Because some people are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute.
Sorry to interrupt your thought.
There we are. Brilliant. Good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Don't sit back.
Now wait a minute. I have to think what I was going to say. I think I forgot. What were we talking about?
Well, we were talking about, you know, that it comes from the composer. Sometimes the composer is the performer, but there are sometimes two people. But the fact that it has to be filtered through a performer to an audience in some way. But the fact is that the performer has to have a personal relation, has to develop, I guess, a personal relationship to a piece of music.
I was going to say that most of the time, the performer does a much better job of my piece than I would have done. The way they interpret it, I'm too close to it. You know, and quite often I'll actually play the piece on the oboe because then I get a feel as a performer. There's a difference between a feel as a composer and as a performer. You just do it differently. And most of the time, the performers do a much better job than I thought of, than I would have done.
Go ahead, Richard.
I've got a good number of thoughts, actually. First of all, Betsy, what you just said is absolutely right. I mean, you know, it's funny because with the new bullet and the rock concerto with Orchestra Toronto, and then the new bullet last year, as with a lot of some of my other stuff, you know, I'm quite happy to play my own music. When I hear these other people play it, I just thought, actually, this isn't such bad stuff. I mean, you know, clearly they seem to be enjoying it. I mean, there must be something in it, you know. The other thing is, Michael, in what you said, I have posted recently on my wall, and I will repost again, 2 particular films made by a now dead, deceased British pianist named Kenneth Van Bartheld, who was actually headhunted by ITC back in the late 50s to play the role of the Saint, but he turned it down. Roger Moore got the job instead. Anyway, Kenneth Van Bartheld, he was a marvelous teacher. I studied with him in Edinburgh for a little while, but he talks about this whole thing about hearing Beethoven's music on the pianos that Beethoven wrote on, and like the Liszt sonata, he demonstrates on the piano that Liszt would have composed it on. And then he similarly does something with the Emperor piano concerto, where he talks about how tempi and things were like that were completely different to what we perceive now as how to play it. Even involving the famous third Chopin etude in, I forget, it's now, everybody plays it very slowly, but the original tempo was quite, Chopin wrote vivace, which wouldn't work obviously. But anyway, things like that. It's a fact. I'll post them again over the next couple of days so that you can see these 2, because they're fascinating examples of matters of interpretation, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, the music, you know, when you listen to a recording of the Appassionata and you listen to like Claudio Arrau's performance, and then you listen to Ashkenazi, who was quite new to Beethoven when he defected from Russia back in 1963. And I think his performance of Beethoven is fantastic, actually. But when you compare performances of Arau, Richter, Ashkenazi, Gilels, Wilhelm Kempff, you know, you'll get, you know, 6 different ideas on how this music is received by 6 incredibly, you know, amazing minds. And that says to me something about the quality of the music itself. Tells you that it can say so much, and it's so sort of individual, but it's so strong.
So here's the thing, Rich. Beethoven piano sonatas, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember there being metronome markings put there by Beethoven. He was given the metronome in 1817 or whenever it was. Yeah. He went back to his orchestral pieces, his symphonies, and he put these metronome markings there.
Yeah.
And this has been this issue that has existed for ever since Beethoven's time. Do you play things at these speeds? And some of the speeds are really horrifically fast.
Well, the Appassionata, for instance, I mean, the metronome marking that he put to that for the first movement, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I think the machinery that he was given was completely at fault, and basically Beethoven should have stuck to his guns. And yeah, you're absolutely right. With the 32 sonatas, you just get suggestions, but the music itself tells you exactly how it's supposed to be.
And what's interesting to me is that Brahms refused to put metronome markings on
Absolutely,
things.
and wisely so.
You know?
Wisely so.
Yeah.
And I don't think Liszt did. I don't think Chopin did either. I mean,
I don't think so. No.
Chopin etchings in metronome markings that have been imposed.
Yeah.
But
when I was a piano student, I played those things as slow as I possibly could.
Actually, you know, the Chopin etchings, because I practice, I have about 8 of them now cooking. And I just find that, you know, yeah, I can play them with speed, but that's just showing off. And at my age, I'm going to be 57 this next month, so I can get away with playing them slowly. Great.
It's deeper. It's more profound.
You just get so much out of it, you know. And that's the thing I'm looking forward to old age, is that I can get away with giving performances of great pieces, but at a slower tempo and really feel it.
Yeah,
that's lots of pedal, milk it out, and just, you know, anyway, there we go.
I had a question for you that's kind of related tangentially, talking a lot about live performance and how the audience is intimately involved in that experience. But how do we achieve, or are we looking for something completely different if we're going to a recording situation? I don't know if you guys have all recorded your own works or other works. Like, what, how do you address that missing piece of the audience, but you know that the audience is coming later?
I will start with this because I don't record my own music, obviously, not being a composer, but I have done recordings, and I think that the basic approach that most people would agree to is that we have this imaginary audience, and that's the challenge if you're just doing a recording in a studio situation. And then you have to make sure that you're recording as big chunks of things, and those chunks are recordings in themselves. And where recordings will falter is that when you get caught up in the minutiae of the situation, and the producer starts to phone back and says, well, you know, I'm not happy that second oboe is a little flat there. Can you do bar 156 again? And as soon as you get down into that rabbit hole, then you're going to have a problem. And so I'm not saying to anybody, don't listen to recording producers, but don't.
Oh dear. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And the whole idea of bar by bar recording and things like that is false. I did a lot of recordings for the CBC when I was in my teens and early 20s, and I believe fully in complete takes of things. The Dante Sonata, you know, Opus 110 Beethoven, things like that. I just believed in complete takes. And if we had to do it a couple of times, if we had to do some editing, then yeah, fair enough. But I just thought, in fact, I mean, I would go as far as to say that the only recordings that I buy are those of dead pianists who in live performances. You know, so the recordings, unfortunately, I don't have anymore because they were lost in the fire last year. But I had live performances of Richter, Rubinstein, Ashkenazi, the whole lot. I mean, and you know, you hear these guys. You can get it all on YouTube. Live performances. There's a fantastic performance I had of Peter Donahoe giving the Busoni Piano Concerto live at the Royal Albert Hall as part of the proms in 1988. Something that my mother bought for me as a Christmas present. That's gone now, but I mean, I can still see it on YouTube. But I feel like I'm ripping them off because you know. But nevertheless, you listen to something like that, you're hearing it live, you're hearing the heartbeat at the moment. And um, if the recording, if the recording and the performance is honest, then it's going to be fine. I mean, one of my favorite recordings is Alicia Dalla Rocca in the Cacciatorian Piano Concerto, a piano concerto I'd love to play at some point, actually, but with Raphael Kubelik, Frubeck, whatever his name is, with the Lost London Philharmonic. That's a fantastic recording, and you can I know that it was done in one take. Because of something that happened with the horn players in the middle of the first movement. But it's such a marvelous performance. You know, it's such a, and it's the first recording, it's a recording that I grew up on from the age of 12. And it just says so much. And it's the only recording where the second movement, the flexitone player, actually really knew what he was doing. There's no other recording to match it. But so there's that.
Betsy, have you recorded any of your stuff?
Oh yeah, in Regina, and I recorded before I started composing. We had a weekly broadcast. I played with the Atlantic Symphony, which had a CBC weekly broadcast, and there were 4-hour sessions, and we would rehearse and record right then and there. Nothing before, but I think the best way to record is to have some performances first. Like if you're in a string quartet or pianist or smaller group, then you can take something on tour. And in fact, even orchestras that do a lot of touring. We did a lot of touring in Halifax, but we didn't tour and then record. One of the mandates was that we play a lot of Canadian music, so there was no chance even to hear it ahead of time. But I think the best way to record is to play a performance of the work several times and then straight through, and then do the cleanups. If someone made a mistake or something, that's easy enough to edit. Especially these days. Back in those days, you had reel-to-reel tapes, and an edit was a real nightmare.
Now, of course, everybody's going to be recording everything now that's coming out, because you do a performance and you have to have a virtual audience, and so. But what the interesting thing is that everybody is putting things out there, and then you have to really review your performance coldly, and that's a painful process sometimes.
Well, so when these orchestras have to play for essentially an empty audience, or like the theater manager or the technician, it's recreating that atmosphere and the electricity in the audience. I think we're not ever going to be able to get that in this time, now that in spite of we're at least offering some music to everybody, and that's our connection. But getting that energy is it's a missing piece.
I think what we're all hoping is, at least if it's difficult if you're in a situation where there's a Toronto being in phase 2 right now, and not only Toronto, and if you can't even have 50 people there, it's those 50 people are really important to make this work. And as much as we really have missed playing together and working with each other, we also just as much miss those people sitting with us, because it's an experience. Audience members usually are surprised by this when we say this, that how important they are for us to be able to do our craft, because they think, well, I've paid for my ticket, I'm just sitting there. But they're not just sitting there. And you feel this all the time. I mean, my back is turned to the audience. Jay, you see the audience. Betsy does. So does Richard as a soloist. I feel the audience completely. And I know when they're there and when they're not there. I mean, when they're following. And we just are hoping so much of a return to having audience that it's something that's indescribable right now.
Absolutely. So I have one more question that actually came from Michael. What makes you do this, composer friends? Why do you do this? Why do you compose?
I'm driven. When I turned 50, my kids made a big poster for me. And it says, I like to make things. I've always liked to make things. I do woodworking. The beds you see behind me, I made those. It's captain's beds. They have the village out there. So can you hear me? I
Yeah. Yep.
sew a lot. I made Erica's gowns when she played. I made my other daughter's wedding gown. And I think the composing is another facet of liking to make things. Only that was special. That took over. When I started doing that, I stopped sewing, I stopped the woodworking. It's all I did was compose, and I compose a lot. I'm always composing. Someone asked me to write something and I write it. So that's why I compose. I'm driven.
How about you, Richard?
I'd say the same thing. What Betsy said is absolutely, I can't think of doing anything else. I mean, I really can't do anything else. I mean, I'm useless that way. I can cook. I'm a good cook. Make a good chili. But, and like I said, I'm very lucky that I'm in a situation where I get to actively experiment, in my work environment. But, and I feel very fortunate that, and I'm sure Betsy is the same as well, because she plays the oboe so beautifully in orchestra surroundings where you get to play, many, many great pieces of music and things like that. And all of that informs how you think about when you begin to write something of your own. But yeah, it's a very unique thing, and it's lovely to be able to write for people that you really care about as well.
Yes.
Okay, I got one more question before we sign off, and everybody gets to answer. What's at the top of your bucket list, either to conduct or compose or play? What's at the top of your bucket list? What would you like to do most? How about Betsy?
I can't narrow it down. I saw that question and I started thinking about it, and I just couldn't think what it would be. What I would love is for my grandsons to become composers. They're terrific little musicians. They're amazing. They're 11 years old. You wouldn't believe how beautifully they play. That's what I at one point I wanted Erica to compose. Maybe she will now, because she's stuck inside. She started sewing. That's the next step.
Richard?
Dare I say, I want to be the next president of the United States because I want to sort that country out. But anyway, apart from that, what was the question again?
What's at the top of your bucket list? What would you like to write that you haven't done yet, or perform even, because you're a soloist as well? Is there anything that's at the top of your bucket
like I said, I mean, I've never played. I'd love to play the Busoni piano concerto, but it's too expensive, and we can't afford it right now. But the Cacciatorian piano concerto is something that I would love to play with an orchestra someday, because it's a piece that it means a great deal to me. It's a fantastic work. It had such a lot of popularity when it first came out, and then suddenly it sort of dipped for a while, and then anyway, but it's a fantastic work. But it depends on, it's similar to the Busoni. I mean, there's two performances of the Busoni that I really care about. Is John Ogden and Peter Donahoe. And there's other performances of it I don't want to hear because they just make it sound so bad. Do you know what I mean? Which is a horrible thing to say, but they actually, I mean, the problem with the Busoni is that it really needs a good musician behind it. And I think the Cacciatorian piano concerto is a very sacred work to me, but it needs, well, somebody like me behind it, as opposed to, you need to care about, it's like, as Michael said, you need to care about stuff like this. Otherwise, it's just notes. And this sort of thing, anybody can do this. A trained monkey can do this, but if you really care about it,
No, they can't.
then and that makes a huge difference. Like our Carnival of the Animals, for instance, which was mad as a box of frogs. I mean, I basically want to do the whole thing on one piano in this Summerhill orchestra, which was brilliant. But what a performance we gave, eh?
That was fun.
It was
fun.
It was brilliant fun.
I'd like to try it again and give it another stab, personally.
No, it was great fun. And then you guys played my Canadian piece in the second half. Oh, that was, no, but the Carnival of the Animals, I mean, that was just, and Sarah is so much fun to work with, The whole thing was great. Anyway, that's my answer.
And Michael, do you have a bucket list item?
Well, I don't have an item. That's the unfortunate thing. I've got a whole list of things, and I've got a lot of pieces that I've learned and I'm ready to do. But being an orchestral conductor, you have to have the forces that are ready to do it, and that requires money and all kinds of other things. I mean, I can't lie. I have to say, just like everybody else, all the Mahler symphonies. Except for number 2 and 3, all of the Shostakovich symphonies. There are all kinds of pieces of other people that I'm not going to even mention. And the other thing is to commission lots more music to expand the repertoire of the symphony orchestra, the Canadian repertoire I have a huge ambition for Canada to be the compositional force that it should be. Canadian music is not anywhere near as well known as it should be in the world. We as performers, as Canadians, are better known throughout the world. A lot of that is due to people like, you can go back to Maureen Forrester and Glenn Gould and John Vickers, and then now we have Yannick Nézet-Séguin as conductor, and other people all doing a magnificent work, tons of singers, et cetera, et cetera. It's our music. It's our compositions that aren't known, and they deserve to be. And so we all have to be, falling in love with this music and having more of it made and being behind it.
I agree. All right, well, this was delightful. Thank you so much for joining me in this chat. It's been nice to have you, and perhaps we'll do it again.
Thank you so much, Jay. It's great to see you. It's too bad we can't see each other live in person right now and work together, but this will pass, and we will soon.
I hope so.
We will. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Betsy.
Bye. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, and thank you, Richard.
Yeah, pleasure. Absolutely. Fantastic. Lovely evening.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, and happy Halloween.
Take care.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.